Hello and welcome to the Zach Think Share podcast. Today I'm excited to say I have Kate Mangino with me. Kate, I've been reading your book the past month and a half, 2 months. It's been a stop on my fair play, equal partnering, equality driven journey, and it's been a great stop along the way. I heard you talk maybe a month ago or so on the podcast. I always
We can do hard things.
We can do hard things. Thank you.
Sure.
I'm fasting right now because I had way too much sugar and alcohol for my birthday the past couple of days. So I feel like I'm in a brain fog. I apologize. But I'm excited to have you. And there's a couple things from your book that I learned a lot about, and I want to see if I'm understanding it right and have your expertise to either call me out or confirm that I'm learning it correctly.
All right.
But also, I talk a ton about mental load, and you're one of the experts out here talking about these things. And I might be a loud person, but you're a really smart person around this.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation we're going to have. So, and real quick, if you want to add context, so Kate is the author of Equal Partners. You're a researcher, you're a writer. Share a little bit more, kind of introduce yourself.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me on today. I'm thrilled to be here. I have worked in the international development industry for my whole professional life. I was a Peace Corps volunteer, and then ever since then, I've been working for a series of nonprofit organizations, specifically designing and delivering gender programming. So just making sure that services that are put out there, whether it's health or access to democracy or access to health and sanitation, that those services can be accessed equally by people of all genders. And I guess it was about 10 years ago when I started to feel a real disconnect in my life, because professionally I was seen as a gender expert and I was flying all over the world and talking to groups of people and having really sophisticated conversations about gender in Zambia and in Indonesia and in Nepal. And then when I had little kids, I would go to the playground down the street and have very antiquated conversations about gender in my own community. And I was frustrated with this disconnect, and I wanted to have more gender conversations with my own family and friends, but I didn't know how to do that. And so that started I sort of made a pivot at that point in my life, and I try to keep the international work to 50 to 70%. And then I spend the rest of my time researching and writing about what's going on in North America. And that's where my book came from, is sort of trying to figure out where American families are in terms of gender divide and how we can do something about it and move the needle a little bit forward.
Yeah, moving that needle forward is no small feat for sure. I am myself, recovering man-child and or working on moving my own needle forward, and trying to figure out consistently, and I think having success with a handful of guys. And I'm looking forward to some of your critiques on how I go about it. So, the first place I wanted to start, you reference a couple chapters into your book, the EP40, so Equal Partner 40, where you were like, you're in search of who are these equal partners. I know they exist somewhere out there, but where are they?
Right.
And you shared like there was a significant amount of challenge you had finding, like, even sending that first email and like vetting out, is this guy who his community says he is or who he says he is?
Yeah.
So one of the things I wanted to do is put myself through the test, sort of. I think a lot of people I know look towards me to see me as someone that at least talks the talk, and I talk about where I fail to walk the walk. And so I'm curious where I fit sort of on your scale. So what's like one of those first questions that you were asking guys to see where they sort of fit on the scale?
Absolutely. So just a little context for our listeners. I decided that I wanted to take a assets-based approach when I wrote my book. I love an angry feminist book. I read them all the time, but I didn't want to necessarily write one. So I wanted to talk to men there's plenty of examples out there of what men do that we don't like, but there aren't enough examples of what we do want and
Mhm.
positive examples of what's working. So I went out to try to find men who are already living as equal partners under my definition and talk to them about like where they came from and what made them who they are and what's their motivation, how do they make it work, to sort of share stories, hopefully with other people to help them along. So I did, when I started to look for these men, I have a protocol. I just had like a questionnaire and I would start emailing people that I know. And then it would snowball into, oh, I think my brother in law maybe sounds like that kind of guy. And then I would talk to that guy and be like, no, that's not really me. But my friend down the street might fit so it was just one of those like goose chases, to be honest. But the first question I ask, which I'm pretty sure I know your answer, Zach, are you aware of gender inequalities in society?
For sure.
For sure.
Definitely.
Right. And I asked that question just because I wanted to see if people are aware of what's going on around them and not just in their own household, right? Okay, number 2. Do you make a conscious and concerted effort to counter gender inequalities in your routine actions?
Yes. And some short examples. When I want to take my shirt off playing basketball, I think about women can't do this without causing a scene. When I see, walking down the street and I see a woman switch sides, I purposefully don't get defensive. And I'm like, she's probably had a crappy experience with a man. I'm not going to take this personally. Um, those are little micro versions, but
Great
yeah,
examples. Or you host a podcast about gender inequality. There's another one, right? So a couple of
true.
examples there. Okay. Are you as comfortable with a female boss as you are with a male boss? I
I
didn't
think
want to just
so.
ask, are you okay with a female boss? Because some people also
Sure.
don't want any boss at all. So does that make you uncomfortable in any way? Women in leadership or power positions?
No, no.
Okay. Does your wife have a paid job? So I ask that because when one of you works part-time or doesn't work, that shifts the dynamic in the household about how many hours you have available for household work, caregiving work. And my book specifically was looking for dual income couples. So that
Hmm.
was why I asked that question. In theory, do you think it is okay for a woman to earn more than her husband?
Yeah, I was excited about the possibility. So when I met Alyssa when she was graduating college, and she
Mm-hmm.
had like a 4.0 or like a 3.99 or something, and in economics, I was like, I'm happy to be like a stay at home dad moving
Okay.
forward. And I had an engineering degree too, um, so I've been talking about for years if she wants to be like the head earner and like she wants to be a doctor or something, like totally happy to support her in that career.
All right. All right. These are the tougher questions. Do you regularly do an average of 40 to 60% of the physical household chores and or child rearing responsibilities in your home?
So we've been using the Persist app to track this.
Okay.
I would have to I would have to I wish I had asked ahead of time so I could have had some data ready to share, but I got to be pretty close to that. I think that I know that the app currently shows 25/75, and I know that includes a lot of things that are like car maintenance and like a lot of like small things that like show up throughout the year. So I know that the data is not complete, or it's
Are
like
you
it
the
has.
75 or are you the 25?
I'm the 25, so I know that
Okay.
I'm either on the edge of it, or I'm on the outside edge of it. But I recognize we're headed towards that. One of the things I coach my guys to do is have iterative, long term conversations with their partners. One of the things we've been working out, for those that are just listening, can't see it, is we've been working on this chore chart. So blue is
Okay.
me, pink is her. This
Yep.
is specifically just for cleaning, though.
Okay.
So there's obviously a lot of other invisible labor tasks that are not on that list, but it's something we're actively working on. So I don't know if I have the data to prove the 40 to 60. I would estimate that we're pretty close to it, if not there yet.
Okay. I would, and just to add on to that conversation, very few people keep data on what they do in their household. So the guys that I interviewed didn't have data either.
Hmm.
And I gave a range 40 to 60 because I think when you're going through this, like what you're doing with Alyssa now and trying to document where you are, that's awesome. You're not going to keep this up for the life of your relationship, right? There's not anything that's less sexy than following each other around with an Excel spreadsheet for years on years, right? And it ebbs and flows. Like we all have times, when my dad got sick, I had to step away, and Evan stepped up and took care of 90% of what was going on in the household. And there have been times when he started a new job, and I would take the 80 and he would be the 20. But those come and go, right? But
Mm,
you have to sort of look at your relationship from 10,000 feet of
mm,
where it is over time and see if you're somewhere in that middle average. And the next question is the hardest one. This is where I lost most of my people. Do you regularly do an average of 40 to 60% of the cognitive labor in your home? And this is where I get at the mental load or invisible tasks. A
mm,
lot of people didn't even know what this is. So it led to a conversation about defining cognitive labor, giving examples of it. And what I found is really only the men that were aware of it and consciously working at it were the ones that could say yes to this, because it's not something that happens in a routine fashion for a mixed sex couple.
mm. I mean, I would say I fit, what you just said there is I'm definitely aware of it. And I am definitely working on it. Even this morning, like, um, I had this moment where our toddler was sitting down, she was playing. I knew Alyssa was going to get the things for her hair for the morning. And I had this moment of like, wait a second, there's something we need to be doing right now. Duh. Okay, Zach, yeah, we got to get breakfast. So started, our toddler's pretty picky, probably pretty normal toddler behavior,
Yep.
and started thinking about, okay, hey, Ev, do you want to do waffles this morning? You want to do cereal? As we went in, she said yes to waffles, which is not always a quick yes. So I was like, yep, I'm on it. And
Waffles. Yep.
forgot to prep her, talking to her about wearing a bib, which she doesn't like wearing a bib, but she gets syrup all over herself. So there's that moment of a lapse of we started waffles. Alyssa sat down at the table with us, and then she's like, oh, we got to put a bib on. And that erupted into no, I don't want to wear a bib, no, I don't want breakfast. And then we ended up having a bit of a blow up. And there was that moment of like, damn, this is on me. I totally forgot to prep her in like the moment that she said yes to waffles, and you say, hey, remember, we got to wear a bib for it, so that when she got to the table, she was emotionally prepped that, oh, I'm going to wear this thing that I don't like. And even though this will be a not fun experience, I'll enjoy the waffles. So
Yeah.
um, there's so many moments just like that where I'm recognizing that I'm not holding things. Another example is, so we have a rental property a couple towns away that we used to live in for a long term. We were separated back in 2018, and a huge part of it was like she would always feel like she needed to follow up with me on contractors. And right now we have some
Mm.
electric work that needs to happen, and and I've been tasked with managing that. And I realized the other day, I was like, oh, she keeps asking me, like, what's the status on things? And I'm realizing, shoot, I haven't texted him in 2 days. She's holding the mental load of this.
Right.
And so
Right.
I've been saying, hey, what would be a frequency of talking about this and checking in with you that you would feel like I'm on top of it, and that you wouldn't need to feel the need to
Right.
check in with me every day?
That's a
Or
good question. Yeah.
so we came to like every other day, just checking in, saying, hey, this is the current status of things. This is when I texted him last, this is the last update. This is what I plan to do next. And it's been like 3 or 4 days since I've like owned that frequency of communication around that specific thing. So I'm working on it. I'm very, very aware of it, given that that's, that's like what my whole business is built on, is educating that. Um, but yeah, it's a long term work in progress. And even as we were talking about the chore chart, is like, it was killing me the other day. She keeps doing chores that aren't on the list. I'm like, Alyssa, please, can we stick to list, because it keeps getting longer. And like, as much as I'm trying to own this, it's hard when I feel like you keep adding new things to it. And I know that sometimes it's just like, as we're cleaning, you see something else. But like, I want to own this for a month and feel confident in all those things and have no new additions. And it hurts my stomach just a little bit every time you add one new chore. Um,
Yeah.
because I think the minimum standard of care that she has versus I have, she definitely has a higher standard. And I'm working on owning and appreciating and caring for the house the same way that she does. And even if I don't care for the house the same way, caring about it because she cares about it, so that she can feel heard and appreciated.
Yeah.
Um, and that's
I think that's a really important point that I heard from a lot of people is a lot of the EP40 like I don't really think this is important to be totally honest, but she does and I love
mm,
her. And so that's enough for me.
yeah, and
Yeah.
that's something I still actively work on. We had to have that conversation again, I think 2 weeks ago, talking about the outside. And I've been a bit of a stick in the mud, like trying to do more of the outdoor landscape and things. Part of it is we're just not in a financial place to spend a couple hundred or thousand on random
Sure.
things to make them look nice.
Right.
And I've let that be the gatekeeping aspect of it.
Mhm.
Um, and so I volunteered the other day. I was like, okay, I'll make a list of all the things. We'll create sort of a matrix of what costs, under 100, under 500, under 1,000 plus. Um, something that takes, an hour versus probably 10 plus hours.
Right.
Um, and or what's like seasonal or like more urgent than others. And I think I haven't finished making the list. I started it, but I think even just making that, I think will be useful for her to see that I see what she sees and am willing to care about those things that I know that she cares about.
Absolutely.
How did I
So,
do?
well, I have two more quick questions, and
Oh,
these
okay.
are these are these are short. Are you comfortable managing all of your household tasks when your partner's away from home? That's kind of a big one because,
Yeah.
do you know how to do everything? So, if Alyssa goes away for work or visits family for the weekend and you can be like, "Yep, I got everything, don't worry about it." Or is she the kind of person who has to like cook ahead of time and prep meals and make sure all the laundry's done and say, "Okay, the babysitter's coming at this time," and does she have to manage the time she's gone before she leaves or can you take care of it?
Ironically, it brings me to a video that I made this time last year, where she went on like a day trip up to Vermont to visit a cousin,
Mhm.
and our toddler was sick, and typically that would mean she's probably texting me 3 or 4 times throughout the day, or she wouldn't have gone because our toddler was sick.
Right, right.
But it was a huge step for me because it was towards the end of the day, and I made a video saying this is a huge milestone that I've, done the confident job that I feel like I can do. And she hasn't checked in all day because she trusts me
Good.
on some level, or because I
Right.
think normally she wouldn't forget and she'd be on top of me. So I would say yes, I do.
Okay. And then the last but not least, do you think Alyssa would agree with all of your answers?
I think the ones that she might disagree with, and again, because we have data to back it up on some level, is the 40 to 60% of the cognitive and domestic load, as well as the emotional labor. That is that's something that is probably lower, and it's probably not in that 40 60 range. I'll bet somewhere closer like 25 to 35 range. That would be my bet.
So I would probably not interview you. I'd probably stop the interview now and say thank you so much. There were a handful of men that I would get to this stage. We would
Mm,
go back and forth on email. I would share this checklist with them ahead of time. They would sort of do a self-assessment before we would get on the phone. I would always talk to partners as well just to make sure that just to not to I guess I don't want to doubt them, but I was also just wanted to triangulate and make sure I was fact checking and they weren't making stuff up. And in the interview, just as you did at the very beginning, when you said, I've got a couple of examples, I would always ask follow up examples. Okay, you say yes. Give me an example of when you do this. Because even sometimes I would have a guy say, yes, this is me, but then couldn't think of an example. And so we
mm,
would we would determine in that conversation, maybe you're not an equal partner. And he would be like, yeah, maybe I'm not. And then it was kind of a sad realization. And so we would talk through that. So I think that even the process of reaching out and interviewing people, I'm hoping had some positive impact on some couples.
yeah.
But in the end, when I set out to write the book, I was like, maybe I'm going to get 100, maybe it's going to be 200. And after it took me about a year to get 40, I was like, 40 is good. We're going to stop here and work with
Yeah.
40. So, yeah.
Yeah. It's a lot of effort. Yeah. And I think similarly, an interesting thing that I wonder if a lot of those guys would resonate with whenever I'm talking to new clients. The this could end up being the title of my book, is the do better loop.
Oh,
It's at least going to be
yeah.
a chapter, but the idea is I think there's so many moments where there's some resentment that builds up, and then the guy messes something up, and then all the resentment comes out in a
Yes.
single argument to blow up. There's tears, there's stepping away from each other, and then he's in fear state, and then he's just like on top of everything for a good 2 weeks. He's at
Yes.
110%. He's killing it. She's like, oh, finally he heard me, everything's changing. And
Yep.
then another week goes by and he's at 100%. Another week goes by, he's at 90%. And then we're back to status
We're,
quo after about
yeah.
6, 7 weeks.
Yeah.
Um, and in that
Or
time, he's thinking, oh, we're good. Like,
we're
oh,
good.
we're
Yeah.
not fighting.
The other thing that can happen, I've talked about this loop as well, actually. And another thing that can happen sometimes is he messes up. Like he's at 90%, but he doesn't do something the way she would do it. And she's had a bad day and she's tired and she's like,
Mm,
just let me do it. Why are you doing it wrong? Or the kids are in the wrong
mm,
outfits, or her hair looks dumb, or you got the wrong thing for dinner. And he feels ashamed and incompetent and all of the things that you feel when you don't do something well. And that then leads him to do less, right? It's sort of like,
mm.
well, if you don't want my help the way I'm going to help you, then you don't get any of it. And I think sometimes couples need to find a way to work through the fact that they're going to do things differently. They're going to take different amounts of time. His idea of doing the laundry is different than her idea of doing the laundry. And you have to have a shared vision on sort of minimum standards to move forward, as opposed to just assuming that each is in each other's head, and knows how to do it.
One of
And
the
it's hard. I think
questions,
it's hard for women too to step back and step away. And that goes into the gender norms and social norms, which we haven't touched on yet. But it's hard for women to step away as
mm,
well as it's hard for men to step up.
where do you think that line is when she's probably critiquing in a less constructive way? And I think there have been a lot of moments where Alyssa does this too. Sometimes I think she's almost like flexing a little bit of her power over me. I don't think she does it necessarily consciously, but it's like in a moment of
A little
shame
gatekeeping.
or
Mm-hmm.
guilt, and she's
Yep.
like, "No, I'm the leader in this domain."
Yep.
But like, where do you think that line is? Because I think there's so many times I see in my comments. I don't make videos about this because I have 91% woman audience, and I'm
Yeah.
not I'm not trying to, most of the time, I'm not trying to
It's a
poke
slippery slope.
poke bears.
Yeah, for sure.
But like, I think there's a lot of moments like, if I let him do this, then it's going to lead to an unsafe situation. So usually I say the line is like the line between safety and like preference. uh, Feels like a good line. It's hard to see sometimes. I think it can certainly lead to like long term like slipping of habits, which is
Right.
like also preference, but can also be like not necessarily safe, but like adds a significant amount of workload. Like, how would you talk to a couple that is having that challenge where it's like he wants to take on more? He's like, please, like, let me take over laundry, and she's like, you're never going to do it right. Like, or really anything, maybe not laundry because that's much lower consequence, I think. But like, how do you talk with a couple that is working on finding that line?
I think the first thing that I always start with is to say there's so much underneath the actual tasks, right? And if you don't understand or talk about the way we've been socialized because of our gender, it's going to be hard to change your behavior. So I think it's important to sit down and really think about how I was raised and how you were raised. Where do you find your value? Where do I even in 2024, when we think we're so gender aware and we're so progressive in the United States, we still have this implicit way of raising boys to be providers
Mm.
and leaders and sort of heads of household, and we still implicitly raise women to be caregivers and to take care of all the little things in the house that need to be taken care of, and myself included, who I'm a Gen X person, feels like I was raised that I have to, as a woman, take care of my family at home. And if anyone is unhappy, it is my fault. And if anything is not in order, it is my fault. And if the house is unclean, it is my fault. And I will be judged for it. And then I should feel shameful because of it. So, talking about those gender norms, talking about the way you were raised and what your expectations are for the home is a really important step to before I think you start to shift those tasks. Because I think sometimes when women lash out and say you're doing it wrong, she knows at the end of the day, if you shrink all of the clothes and your kids look ridiculous going to school, you're not going to get judged for it, but she will, right? The
Mm.
other parents or the teachers or the neighbors are going to be like, oh, what's wrong with her? Their house is such a wreck that those kids are in those crazy clothes. A lot of it comes back to judgment. So if you don't recognize those feelings, whether they're perceived or whether they're real, doesn't matter. They're real for her. So I think if you need to talk about those and talk about, what were you raised to do? Are you feeling adequate in your masculinity around what you're providing for your family? Do you think of provision as just money, or do you think of providing for your family in terms of care and time? Having those bigger conversations, I think, is a really good way to start. And then you can also say directly, our goal is that we have a more equal balance in our household because it's good for both of us. It's not about one of us doing or stepping up for the benefit of the other one. It's for the benefit of both of us. And admitting that you're both going to probably have to remind each other a little bit as you get started. My husband still, after we've been working on this for a decade, has to remind me once in a while, like, Kate, it's okay if you don't do this. Step back. I've got this. It's okay. And just hearing those words sometimes I think can
Mm.
help put me at ease. Like, oh yeah, it is okay. I don't have to do this.
What's
Um,
something that comes up frequently like that?
mm, like, let's say the house is a mess and it's 10 o'clock and I'm super tired and he can see that I'm super tired. He'll be like, just go to bed and I'll clean up. But I'll feel guilty sleeping if I know he's downstairs doing housework. And he's like, it's fine. I can be up for another 45 minutes. I've got it in me. Crawl in bed with a book, go to bed. It's okay. And I need to hear that directly from him because it is hard for me to go to sleep knowing that he's still doing housework downstairs. For some reason, that makes me feel inadequate.
Yeah, it reminds me of a couple months ago, we were talking about laundry and how, Alyssa owns 100% of laundry for her and our toddler. I do my own laundry.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, it came out of her mouth. She's like, "Oh my God, that just came out of my mouth." She was saying that if I were to like let you do laundry, I would feel like I've failed as a woman.
Yeah.
Is like what
Yeah.
the cultural training is around
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And it's probably, what was your reaction when she said that? How did that make you feel?
I mean, my first thought was, listen, did you just hear what came out of your mouth? And I think she was similar, like surprised. And like, I mean, it was just really interesting to see the correlation that was put there is
Yep.
like laundry equals good woman
Yeah.
not doing laundry, and or husband doing laundry equals bad woman.
Bad woman. And not everyone feels that. I mean,
Yeah.
I've talked to plenty of women that don't put that on themselves. I've talked to plenty of women that do. So I don't think it's a blanket statement, but I do think that a lot of, depends on where you come from, geographically, who your parents were, sort of the norms that you were raised with all plays into it. But a lot of us still have these, that's why they're invisible. They're deep down. They're not talked about. They're not written down. No one sat you down. No one sat Alyssa down at any point in her life and said, you're not going to be a good mom if you don't do the laundry of your baby. But yet she feels it, right? And I think I think that's what gender norms are. Those feelings
Yeah.
that you're like, where did that come from? But if you don't make space to talk about it and you're not open with your partner to work through it, then no matter how many times you reappropriate tasks in your home, if you never had that conversation with her and she never said those words out loud and you never heard it, you're always just going to fall back to where you were, right? It's getting at those norms that I think really make shifts and changes in a relationship.
Yeah, and it reminds me of, I know that I've talked a lot with her mom before and her sharing like what her childhood experience was like, and that like their parents, like they would bring their brother out to do stuff like, nope, you guys can't come out and join us until the house chores are done, and he would just get the free pass. So I know that she's done a lot of work to uncover
Mm-hmm.
remembering those and like thinking about how that shaped her. And I think there've probably been a lot of moments of her as a parent influencing my wife as a kid, and that she probably didn't have a lot of those uncovered. And maybe she said or did similar things, which was like, no, we can't go play. We got to do our chores first. Meanwhile, her brother, her dad, like would go out and do stuff. So, um,
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah, it's consistently interesting seeing like what those underlying beliefs are. It's so good when they come out like that
Yeah.
stark and like obvious. And you're like, wow, that was
Wow.
awesome that
Yeah.
that came
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Because then you can deal with it when you can point to it, when you
Yes.
can label it. But it's so
Right.
hard to deal with when you
It's
can't
so,
label it.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which brings me to another thing that I learned from your book, which is benevolent sexism. So I first heard and understood about this from Rose Hackman in Emotional Labor,
Mm-hmm.
and the example she gave was there's benevolent and forgetting what the like overt sexism, and
Mm-hmm.
she'd given it two musical examples. One was Chris Brown's "These Hoes Ain't Loyal," and the name of the song is called "Loyal." Like that's the really obvious one.
Yep.
And she said, ironically, comparatively to this other song, which I think it was "Run Little Girl" by the Beatles, which pretty much said, if you
Oh,
cheat
yeah.
on me, if you do
You're
anything,
dead
like
little
I'm going to
girl.
kill you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which like she was saying that that's benevolent sexism because it's like this really, it's dangerous, but it's like covered in frosting and lipstick. It's like
Right. Like, I
it's like
love you so much.
yeah, it's like this
Don't run
cute
away from
version of
me.
it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um but there's like, it's almost like someone's holding a knife under their jacket that you can't see. um Versus like the other one is just a gun straight to your head, right out in the open. um and what I thought was interesting, so you shared the example of and I wish you'd given a couple more, because I think
Okay.
this has been something I've been trying to label for since I heard it. And I was like, is that benevolent sexism? What is it? So you'd given the example of, I think, where a guy had said, like, wow, I would live in a dump if it weren't
Yeah.
for you, honey, which
Yeah.
my understanding of it, and critique me if I'm getting it wrong, is that it's like an underhanded compliment that acknowledges the work that's being done, however does not offer any sort of a solution and puts the person in a box. So by saying,
Exactly.
hey, we would live in a dump without you,
Right.
it like sounds like a compliment, like, wow, you make it really nice. However, it
Right.
says, I'm going to consistently not do work, therefore you will have to consistently do work so that we don't live in a dump.
Precisely. Yeah. It's
And
over. It's masked. It's sexism that's masked in a compliment, right? Like, you're so good with the kids. I can't imagine doing this without you. The house is so beautiful. We would live in a dump without you. Um, Thank you so much. Like on a Sunday night when you've had a great weekend, like, you always plan the most amazing weekends. I love catching up with friends and going out. We have so much fun. Thank you so much for planning this stuff. I would just stay at home and play video games every weekend if it weren't for you. All of those things sound like compliments, and they would be if you're exchanging them equally. If
mm,
each of you have something equally to say to, thank you so much for the weekend. I could have done this without you. Well, thank you so much for cleaning and doing the laundry, or else we couldn't have gone out. That is an equal partnership. But when it's always one way, you're right. It is making the assumption that she will continue to do that work and you won't, that you're not going to change your behavior. And now she feels like she's been rewarded for it, so she has to keep doing it. So it kind of puts additional pressure on, oh my gosh, every weekend has to be amazing. Oh my gosh, the house always has to be beautiful. Oh my gosh, everything has to be great with the kids or the meals or whatever I'm doing, because this is my value. This is what he loves about me, so I have to keep doing it. And it plays into those gender norms of what women think they need to do to be a good woman or a good mother.
So a concept that came up in Fair Play 101, which is the my group that I work with couples on implementing fair play and getting through the book.
Mm-hmm.
Um, One of the guys was kind of pushing back and saying, "Hey, um, the marital mashup is like this like cute little quiz you can kind of take to identify which of the general stereotypes you fit into, and the options for the women were like traditionalist, accidental traditionalist, super mom, um, and a couple other ones. So from an outside perspective, supermom sounds like, oh, that's like the best one
That's a
almost.
compliment. Yeah, of course you
And then
want to be
on,
this super mom.
yeah, and on the other side, it was like, where's the butter? Two steps forward, one step forward, two steps back.
Yep.
Uh, Giant kid, which is often me. And then better than most is like the best you can achieve, better than most.
Better than
And
most.
he's
Yeah,
like,
because the bar's
why
set
is
so
it
low.
why is it that the best label guys can get is better than most,
Better
and
than
the
most
best one for women is
is
supermom?
superwoman. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
one of the women actually ended up calling it out for me. I couldn't put a word on it when we were having the class, but she'd said like, you're missing the point of the supermom concept, is that like it's actually not a compliment. And I'm
It's not.
wondering
Right.
if we were hearing supermom come out. And I remember I used to have a colleague when I was a sales rep. She was one of the few other parents in that organization. It was mostly a bunch of 20 something dudes in there. Um, but she constantly said like, I feel like I have to be supermom, and I didn't understand it 2 years ago. Is I feel like if someone is labeling someone else a supermom, there's some benevolent sexism in that.
I would agree. I reject it now. I don't use it when people say like, "Oh, you're superwoman, you're supermom." I'm like, "No, don't put that on me. That's not what I want. That's not my
Mm,
goal. I don't want to be superwoman. Superwoman doesn't sleep. Superwoman doesn't have a life to her own. Superwoman has the weight of the world literally on her shoulders because she's taking care of everyone." I don't use it and I don't accept it anymore for those reasons. I think that again, I said I was Gen X. I grew up in the 80s and 90s when we were taught, and grew up in the Midwest, girls can have it all if you work your ass off, right? If you put your nose down, if you get good grades, if you work super hard, if you put 8 hours or more in at your work and then come home and do just as much work at home, you can have it all. But it is going to be hard and it's going to take tremendous effort. But you can be superwoman if you want it. That was sort of the messaging. And I just think we're in a very different place now. I hope we're in a very different place now, the way that we're talking to young people, that if you want to be super person for whatever reason, because that's in you and that's what you want, great. But we shouldn't prescribe that to an entire gender category
mm.
simply because they were born with certain sexual organs.
And as you're saying, like I'm hoping that that's not where we are. I feel like what I've seen, and I'm sure you have a better critique than I do on this, is I feel like the reason that we're able to get to this place and see a lot of this invisible labor is because of COVID,
Yes.
because it all
Mm-hmm.
it all landed on women. And
Yep.
I mean, my experience of it has been is they got really bored, scared and bored during lockdown, and got on TikTok and started talking about it candidly. And I feel like that's where I started hearing, I think, and
Yep.
seeing a lot of these things for the first
Uh-huh.
time. Um, I started talking about being a parent in 2021, while we're going through the pregnancy journey, and that was when the first time that I started getting a lot of attention for my videos was talking about parenthood. Um, and I think that was the first time I started seeing people like, yes, there's the trick shots and the dance moves, but then people were like coming out and talking about. I remember also during like the George Floyd
Mm-hmm.
riots and
Yeah.
that movement, I learned so much, and it was the first time I felt like I saw people really candidly talking about what they were experiencing. Do you feel like that was one of the biggest catalysts for where we are right now, and how popular even just the phrase mental load is?
Oh, hugely. Eve Rodsky, who we both know, will tell you that it was hard for her to sell her book. I think she sold it in 2015, and she was going to publishers, and the publishing industry was like, "What is invisible load? That doesn't exist. We have gender equality. Why are you writing about this? It's not a problem."
Mm,
I sold my book in June of 2020, so 4 months into the lockdowns, and I still wonder if my book would have sold if we weren't in the middle of COVID. But because of all of the reporting and all the social media around, the curtain was pulled back and everyone saw our mess and everyone saw how much women were doing and everyone saw this very fragile environment that so many women had built around them that relied on aftercare and summer camp and the babysitter that came on Friday afternoon and, you know, just all, the neighbor who helped out Wednesday morning. But when your network is taken away and you all just have to be in the home, how that just collapsed in itself. And I didn't have to convince anyone that cognitive labor was a problem or that gender inequality was a problem. People were open to that. And I think that was very much because of the pandemic.
What other things, besides the pandemic and the lockdown, what do you think in the past couple of years have continued to peel back the layers? I would like to think I'm part of that movement of like peeling back and like sharing authentically what's going on, and me just sharing where I recognize I'm adding mental load for my wife. But like, what do you think also has really contributed to improving the way that we talk about mental load and cognitive labor as a culture?
I think that our work in diversity and inclusion has helped tremendously. We have words and ways to describe things, like you were talking about the term benevolent sexism. There's so many things that weaponized incompetence. There are so many things we talk about today that we did not have words for 10 years ago. It's hard to talk about things when you don't know what it is, right? And so I just think that our greater investment in doing diversity and inclusion work has given us a vocabulary to understand inequities, to understand power imbalances, and then to understand ramifications and what that looks like in real ways for real people. I also think it's really important, academics will call it an intersectional lens, but talking about the fact that it's not just about gender in terms of male and female. We need to get off the gender binary. We need to talk about people of all genders. And we need to understand that gender inequities are oftentimes more, what's the word I'm looking for? The weight is greater when you have multiple forms of oppression. So if you're a person of color, or a person with a disability, or a person, a recent immigrant, all of these things add to power imbalances in our society. And I just think that we're just talking about it in a different way. I'm just happy that there's a conversation. I'm happy that you have a podcast where you're talking about this, and all the other pods that I've been part of. We're no longer denying there's a problem, which is great.
Yeah, and I know that right now of the 100 fair play facilitators, I'm one of three guys in there. So I'm hoping in the next couple of years that heads. I don't know if it'll ever really head towards 50%, but 3 out of 100. I'm hoping we can get to 15 and 20 and 30% rather than 3. When you speak to language, I agree that language, I think, is one of the most important things. I gave my first talk the other day to a corporate organization, and I start off with vocabulary. Similarly with the guys in mental load mastery, I kick off with vocabulary. What are some of the words that you feel like are most important? And I'll give you the obvious ones. I'll bet you can add one or two that I totally whiff on.
Okay.
Cognitive labor,
Yeah.
domestic labor, care labor, educational labor, matrescence, kin keeping, weaponized incompetence, and into the DEI direction, like microaggressions.
Mm-hmm.
What are some? Are there any obvious ones that are sticking out to you that like I didn't mention?
Gaslighting. You haven't brought up gaslighting yet, which I think is important. And social norms. I know I keep drilling down on that, but I really think that talking about norms, they're not rules, they're not laws. They change from place to place and culture to culture, but they dictate our behavior, right? I also like the word skills in a way, like when you talk about caregiving skills or household skills. And we oftentimes, I think there are still some unspoken assumptions that women are just somehow better at caregiving than men, that maybe it's in our DNA, or maybe it's in our hormones, or maybe it's in the fact that we carry babies to term biologically. But that's not true. All humans are capable of being caregivers. It's about learning a skill and practicing the skill and getting better and prioritizing it. And so I think caregiving skills are an important concept for people who are trying to do more in the home, especially when you think about, anytime you learn how to do something, whether it's a sport or a hobby, it takes practice and it takes time, and you're going to make mistakes. And at first you're going to feel inadequate because you're new at it, but you have to push through so that you get better. And I think caregiving and household skills are no different.
I like how you frame that, because It reminds me of, I don't know if you're familiar with Laura Danger, but I think she stitched one of my videos a couple of years ago, and I talked about one of the things I did that I didn't have language for. Again,
Yeah.
I wore a weighted vest, and I didn't drink alcohol during my wife's pregnancy,
Okay.
and I wasn't completely honestly sure why I was doing it, but I was like, I'm trying to match her experience a little bit so that I
Okay.
can have awareness. And the example I give, I had a little fanny pack with a 5 pound weight in it, just so I had a physical
Yeah.
reminder
Reminder.
that my wife is pregnant at home. And I was a teacher. I'm 6'5". I like scale up steps like three at a time, and I whacked myself in between the legs one day running upstairs as a teacher. I was like, oh shoot, like Alyssa can not only can she not normally do that, but like she can't move that fast. And so it was just like one of those reminders of physically the experience she's having. But what I think I was doing was building the skill of empathy, um,
Yeah. Yeah.
which
Absolutely. Empathy is another good word.
I had not considered until it was put like that by Laura, that like
Yeah.
empathy is actually a skill, kind of like
Yeah.
you'd said, like it's not necessarily an innate ability. It's something that we learn and practice, and
Right.
women are really good at because they're taught from a very young age of all of the emotional labor that is going to be required of them to be a successful woman in our culture, to not be assaulted, to not be put in a crappy situation, to not be called, a bitch or a shrewd, or like not be called a name that they wouldn't deserve if they just had, looked like a man. Um,
Absolutely. And one thing that you haven't mentioned on on that list that I want to make sure I bring up is a lot of your examples are because it sounds like you're trying to be a better partner for your wife and you're trying to be a better dad for your toddler. But I also don't want to forget that all the research we have shows us that men are happier when they participate in the home and in caregiving roles. There's actually benefit to you. We know that men are on average dying 5 years before women. We are seeing very high cases of heart disease and substance abuse and stress. And that's because men are holding in their feelings. They're not talking about them. They're carrying, maybe it's financial responsibility of their family, or maybe it's trying to be a leader and not showing fear or not showing frustration or weakness. It's trying to live up to masculine norms and performing masculinity at work and at home. And men who can be their own genuine selves at home, who are loved for who they are, who are free to make mistakes, and who have deep connections with their partner and their kids are shown to live longer, be healthier, and be happier. So the benefits are not just for your partner, they're also for you.
Yeah, as you're saying that, I'm recognizing the cultural norm in me is kind of rejecting that. It's like my first thought is like, no, this is
No,
definitely for
she's
them.
wrong.
Um, but like looking back,
That's
I
fair.
mean, one of the things that I did when our child came is, after I took 4 months of paternity leave, um, I changed jobs, because I was
Okay.
like, I don't know how we're going to survive with me 50 hours out of this house. So I went to a remote, hybrid remote sales job, which I always wanted to try, which also ended up being like really useful for my career trajectory now as a full-time coach and creator. But I, I think I would probably agree if I was, it was only 2 or 3 months that I was full-time working out of the house and coming back to, who knows what, but I think the closest that I've never experienced being a dad without being pretty close. I guess those 3 months are the closest I can come to it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm really curious how unhappy I might be if I was out of the house for that long and experiencing that much, like without them. Like 3:30, our toddler gets out of daycare, and usually Alyssa picks her up so I can keep working. But if I don't have meetings, there's very often, probably like once, sometimes twice a week, I will call it a day and join them. So it's a good point. I think the equalness has made me happier, but it's hard to label when you're not looking at maybe the how it might be otherwise.
For sure. And speaking to your cynicism, I understand that the day to day happiness might not be apparent. The day to day happiness might be like, what happiness are you talking about? I rushed out of work to pick up my kid from daycare, or I was cooking dinner and cleaning the house. How is that making me happy? I think the happiness comes long term. It
Mm.
comes when your toddler is a teenager and you still have a really close, great relationship with her because you've built that over time. Or when you see her graduate from college and you can look at that graduation and be like, we did that. It wasn't just me at work and my wife raised this child. We did this together.
Mm.
I often hear the word competency. The men in the EP40 data set told me they felt competent in taking and caregiving for their family and knowing how to take care of their family. And that brought them huge satisfaction, that they felt incompetent and unhappy when they knew I couldn't even run my household for a week if my wife disappeared or my partner disappeared. There were 5 EP40 who were in same partner relationships. So I just want to, mention that a lot of what we talk about, we sort of fall back into heteronormative assumptions because we talk a lot about different sex couples, but a lot of these patterns show up in same sex and queer couples as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know a handful of times I get the question of like, does this show up with same-sex couples? And I typically say it can, and I think if we, when you come to like one of those intersections at a stoplight that has those divots in the ground from all of the traffic that's gone through those, like they typically don't have as many of those divots, or they both have the divots, and so it's like, oh, well, who's actually going to fit into this social norm role? So there's a lot more creating that inevitably kind of has to happen. And my understanding is that like those conversations end up being a bit more direct because they're like, we don't have a social norm to fall into that we are
Right.
taught, which is very
Right.
different.
Right. We have a little bit of data, not enough. Hopefully we will in the next decade or so, that same sex couples tend to be more equal or more equitable than different sex couples, but still struggle to find parity. And I think that's because of structural obstacles in our culture. For example, the workday is longer than the school day. So when you have kids who are of school age, it makes sense for one of you to have a flexible or part-time job, to be home for those kids, and one of you, and the way insurance works in the United States, one of you has to have a full-time job to carry insurance. That's a huge,
Mm.
um, that's actually a really big part of equal partnerships in the United States that other countries don't have to worry about. One of my equal partners who is Canadian, when they had kids, they both just dropped down to 75% of work. But because healthcare was covered nationally, they could do that, which we don't have the option to do in the United States. So that's an important, there are structural barriers that all couples, regardless of gender identity, have to navigate.
I had never considered that healthcare was actually a reason for that. Yeah, because Alyssa, a huge reason I think she stayed in her job,
Yep.
one is because it's very convenient. She's from home 99% of the time, but really good insurance. And we really like the balance of that versus like
Right.
I'm on an entrepreneurial venture and
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a lot of challenge to this, but we felt like, she supported me in making this jump to do something, one, that I love, but two, we thought could turn into a very good financial space for
Mm-hmm.
us.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I had not considered that insurance would be a barrier, but that totally makes sense. Well, Kate, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
For anyone that enjoyed this, go out, get the Equal Partners book. Really great read. Um,
Hold it up.
I have it on
Just came
Audible.
out in paperback.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a fantastic book. I've learned a lot from it, especially if you've. I think there's some similar items from like Fair Play, but I think to what you said at the beginning, like I often talk to the guys about Fair Play. I'm like, hey, those first 3 chapters, like brace yourself. They're challenging, and I did not experience that same sharing of the current problem the way that it is, and I did not feel. then again, a lot of my defensiveness has gone down over the years, but I did not feel like attacked at all by any of the most of the parts in there, but a lot of good self reflection there. So, highly recommend the book. And Kate, looking forward to more things from you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me today, Zach.
You're welcome.